What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some new details about the Blood of Dawnwalker, courtesy of a nice little deep dive that was posted by the developers themselves, Rebel Wolves, over on their YouTube channels and stuff. However, just to get the biggest part of that out of the way right here at the beginning, the really big update is that they are officially releasing on September 3rd, 2026, which makes them, I would say, one of the few games we have proper release dates for later in the year. Though probably worth mentioning that Phantom Blade Zero launches like a week after this, which also has some buzz around it, but they are two different genres, so I don't think it'll matter too much. But release date aside, this was a pretty good information drop. So Rebel Wolves let us know, of course, the release date, but also dropped a story trailer, as well as a gameplay overview of like certain open world interactions, and this stuff in combination with information they have previously released that I covered. I think we're starting to get a pretty clear picture of what this game is going to ultimately be. Now, those older videos exist if you want to kind of get caught up. I don't necessarily want to rehash them here, but the one bit of information I do want to cover in this video is that there are basically two things that I think are going to make or break this game for most people, just judging by what I've seen so far, and that is likely going to be the time mechanic alongside the combat itself, because I think how much people wind up enjoying that stuff alongside, of course, the usual things like how great the world feels, etc., are going to go a long way in terms of coping with how much the game costs, which is looking like a $70 base price, which isn't outrageous by any means by today's standards, but given the time mechanic and everything else we're about to get into, I could see some people kind of being a little wishy-washy depending upon how much they enjoy those things, I guess. But given that Rebel Wolves is made up of like ex-CDPR devs and everything who have worked on other games that I think could have easily charged $70, it's not necessarily a wash out of the gate, but let's talk a little bit about that. So the time mechanic is really the big one. If you're unaware, the game is on a timer of sorts where there are 30 days to accomplish your main objectives, and as you complete quests and objectives, time is passing. You will be up all day and night, and that plays into the Dawnwalker part of it, with you being a human during the day and more vampiric during the night, with that time progression both marking not only story progress, but depending on the things you actually wind up doing, progression of the world itself. Now, it's a relatively soft timer from everything I've seen, but it is still a timer, and I'm curious to see how that works in its actual execution, which plays into some of the gameplay and open world stuff they showed here. Now, the story trailer was nice, but I don't really think gave us any new information, truly. We ultimately play a character known as Cohen, who is trying to save his family from the clutches of some vampiric overlords and their leader, Brensis. Now, the general plot here is that during the Black Plague, this valley in the Carpathians got isolated due to things like the Black Plague, and these vampiric entities saw this as the perfect time to come up here, set up shop, and establish themselves as pseudo-religious figures to be worshipped by the locals in a sort of mix of a twisted Catholicism thing. Our job as Cohen, someone who has been partially infected with their vampiric powers, has an opportunity to try to end this, of course. But realistically, that's all stuff we, for the most part, already knew. Now, this gameplay overview is where I think things get really interesting, because they show us a bit of how running around and questing is going to work, at least in part, alongside a little bit of progression on top of that. Straight away, it does look to be, at least in part, a sort of like tower-based system where you're looking to get up to really high points and then use them to survey the land and points of interest. You can see some of the things that are going on there. It does look like you can also stumble along these things, but that is more or less the general layout. So it does seem to be a situation where you'll go try to find these towers and everything and then run around. Now, actively running around does not in and of itself pass time. Completing quest objectives seems to be the thing that passes the time. And that's important because we do actually have the ability for a little extra fast travel, both literally faster travel on foot and then actual fast travel points via things like shrines that can be unlocked to allow you to traverse around faster. At nighttime, you'll be capable of turning into a wolf who can very quickly travel around and is just generally more agile, and then during the day you'll have options available as well. And from there they showed off how some of that stuff can play into combat, like using the wolf form to ambush people into the bigger combat encounters. They also mentioned that they made a small change to combat based on player feedback, where initially you had to like open up a wheel to activate your abilities, and now that's just like a regular button press as you would probably expect from other action games like this. So that's probably going to be a good change in the long run. But something I was very interested in was them talking about your corruption level. So we're obviously at least partially vampire here, and we get power then by feeding on people, both humans and animals, both of which will apparently increase a corruption rating. This corruption rating then determines how much access you have to vampiric perks, provided you have the experience and everything to spend on unlocking them at a shrine. Now, what I'm curious about there is the concept of a corruption level, because corruption in and of itself has very negative connotations, and I'm curious if there is a wider approach to like the storytelling and how that is made up, if like the corruption plays into that at all, or if it isn't something that matters and it's just what they're calling it. But that's just speculation on my end that I wanted to pass along to you guys. Now, they show us a few different ways that you can feed. One of them was sneaking up on unsuspecting enemies for, combat situations, but apparently unlike general NPCs, the actual characters you would be fighting aren't something you can kill that way outright, but it's more just like a temporary thing you can use to ambush them with. But they also showed off a few other mechanics here that I was particularly interested in. So they showed off like the vampiric perks and how you get those, like I mentioned, but during the day when you are not a vampire, you also have different abilities, which come from things like your swordsmanship as well as magic you will learn and can then utilize during the day. So it looks like, at least in part, earning experience and then going to a shrine to actually spend it to unlock these abilities is still important, but it seems like you also have to unlock whatever the perk is. So for swordsmanship, they gave an example of finding like manuals and things that unlock this, whereas it seems like the magic and stuff you do actually have to like find a teacher more or less, which seems to be at least one person, and all of those things combined is how you get that progression. But in exploring the open world, which again won't pass time in and of itself, you're going to find a fair few activities to actually do, such as the very traditional enemy camps, which are places where you can do things like find rewards and things like the manuals for the swordsmanship, as an example, is one of the things they showed off here. What was infinitely more interesting to me, however, was your infamy level. So it looks like one of the ways in which the vampiric overlords of this veil will actually be striking back at Cohen, so to speak, is by enacting edicts based on your infamy levels. They showed off a screen basically where the main vampire guy, Brensis, and all of his lieutenants have a bunch of activities associated with them, things they are in charge of. You can take the fight to them by discovering what those things are, and then, of course, dismantling them, which is, general story progression. However, in doing both those things, as well as things like clearing those enemy camps, for instance, increases your infamy, and then at certain levels, Brensis will enact edicts as a result, which makes the world more dangerous. This can be things like simply adding more military checkpoints and the like along the routes and things you will take, thus making the world react to the things you are doing in trying to fight back against this vampire menace. Alongside of those things, they did show off a handful of other just, more minor side quests and things you could get up to and the things you could do, like for instance, just walking straight up walls in that tower at the beginning and things like that. But I think for the most part, that is the gist of what there is to know with this big update. Overall, pretty satisfied to see all of this stuff. Excited to actually start getting release dates for things later in the year, truth be told, but this game looks very promising. Again, as you could probably see with some of the combat as well, I think the combat does not look especially fluid, let's say. It looks very standard action game type of thing. You have your abilities based on the time of day and what you've unlocked, and then basic responses to enemy actions. Nothing I've seen there is truly wowing me, but I don't think for a game like this that is necessarily the end of the world. It's really more about how you can apply powers and dominate those situations, in my opinion. And then, of course, seeing how this sort of like soft 30-day timer actually functions and works in practice when playing the game are really going to be the two things that I think make or break this title in terms of the review scores, etc., when September finally rolls around. So we'll see what happens, but as for today, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover in this particular video. I'm certainly looking forward to this title and seeing how it pans out, and obviously I'll be covering it closer to its actual release. But for today, that is pretty much going to do it. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.